Frank bent to his work. He didn't have much time. Blood was cascading from the dwarf's neck. Soon all his life force would be drained and Nigel would snap awake. He knew what that would be like. He'd find himself lying on the floor with a throbbing neck. The pang would disappear almost immediately, but for a terrible second he'd still feel that rage, that adrenaline-filled need for revenge. He'd turn instinctively toward the actual Frank and start to lunge for him, but before any harm could be done, his receptors would flood with dopamine and serotonin, and he'd laugh aloud. He couldn't help it. But then he'd shut the whole thing down, so Frank knew he had to grab whatever he could before that happened. He patted down the still warm corpse until he found it, a small pouch hanging between his shoulder blades. He yanked off the bag and peered in at the diamonds and rubies glittering inside. What he really wanted was the hammer. Anything in his possession when the game ended would remain with him when it rebooted. If he could remove Kurtalak's main weapon, he would remove him as a threat forever. He'd essentially kill an immortal avatar. Technically, the character would still be alive. He'd rise again when the game started, but no one would play him. He'd wander the landscape randomly, hiding himself when any player came near, or possibly forced into slave labor like the armless centaur Frank had once found hitched to a supply wagon. He could see right away that the hammer wasn't in his hand, it was his hand. There was obviously only one way to get it, but as he raised his sword, a cascade of scarlet droplets splashed on his face, and instinctively he turned away his head. Before he could turn back, the corpse at his feet was gone. Reality cracked, and he found himself kneeling on a black turntable in Nigel's game room, with the sound of his giggling cackle in his ear. Everything had vanished, but a residual sense of warm wetness, and he reached up and wiped a sleeve across his clean, dry face. Already the game was fading like a dream, but he remembered enough to know that Nigel had no reason to be laughing. He should be furious, although, of course, the chip would never allow you to feel fury in real life. Frank's heart was still pounding with rage and the exertion of wielding the non-existent sword, and a wave of dizziness passed through him as his pulse dropped rapidly to normal. But his brain was bathed with dopamine, and his whole being suffused with a warmth of calm contentment. He smiled despite himself, and when he turned to face the friend who so recently had been a foe, a laugh escaped his lips. "You suck, dude," he said, and they both laughed. Nigel was rich, and even his game room was beautiful. One entire wall was nothing but a giant window, and the light filtered through a grove of redwoods that made up the backyard. Frank watched two squirrels chasing each other up the closest trunk and tried to turn his mind off. The problem was, he knew too much. He knew that the warmth he was feeling, the giddy glee, was not real. Not the way the tree was, anyway. It existed inside himself only, nothing more than a skillful manipulation of the body's chemistry. And he knew for a fact that it wouldn't last. So he could never simply enjoy it the way he once had. He had to think, and thinking killed everything. Even now, before the elation in his body even had a chance to fade, the old sadness entered his brain. And rather than just living in this moment of joy, his brain was busy thinking about the fact that in less than a minute he would return to the flat calm he had experienced since he was first chipped when he was 10 years old. Frank could remember being scared in the waiting room, and his mother reassuring him that the procedure would not hurt at all. But it wasn't the pain that he feared. He had overheard the arguments, and he knew that his grandfather, who was not a worrier and who never told his daughter what to do, was dead set against implantation before the age of 18. His mother just kept repeating that he was stuck in the past, that it had been proven safe, and that Frankie, as she called him, would not be allowed to advance to Middle Academy without a chip, and that was that. Frank never understood what his grandfather's objections had been, but he knew they were important enough to make him raise his voice, something he had never heard before. And he knew that Grandpa was smart. He'd been to work with them and seen the respect he was given by the other programmers. He definitely knew more about such things than his mother did, so it seemed most likely that he was right. But he wasn't. The chip was great. Sure, there was an adjustment period, and he had to learn to master all the commands, but having his emotions under control felt like a superpower. Suddenly it was so easy to be good, to be the mature young man everyone wanted him to be.